Enough of narcissistic mums this, and evil dads that. Reddit. What are awesome stories involving your parents? My parents would buy scratch-off tickets often. They'd give them to me to scratch off because I was a kid and it was exciting to me to scratch them off. Of course, since the lottery is pretty much rigged, we never won anything. After scratching off each ticket, I'd show it to my parents and ask, "I won," and they'd say, "Number, you didn't win." Then one day I scratch off a ticket and ask, "I won," and my dad says, "You won." I got really excited. "I won, you won. You won a candy bar." So we go into the convenience store and my dad says to go pick out my candy bar. I go grab a Snickers or something and head back to the counter. I put the candy bar on the counter and hand the cashier my ticket. And that was it. I had won something finally. So then as I grew up, anytime the lottery or scratch off tickets would come up, I'd tell the story about how I won a candy bar once. When I was about 20, I said something about it again. I won a candy bar once. My mom for some reason decided to come clean about it. "You didn't win," she said. "Every time you'd ask us if you won, you looked so hopeful, and then we'd say no, you didn't win, and you'd be disappointed. So daddy just said you won. He went into the store with you and paid the guy for a candy bar and told him you'd be paying with a scratch off ticket. Turns out I'm just a loser like everyone else. Thanks, Dad." That was incredibly sweet of your dad to do that. I'm a very average musician. I'm not awful, but I'm definitely not a unique talent. Picture every mediocre band that opened for a band you actually wanted to see. Any band I've been in probably sounds about like that. My parents let a lot of crappy music happen in their basement, and they came to most of the shows. Like I said, it wasn't completely awful, but looking back on it with adult eyes, I'm amazed they put up with all that noise. I'm also flattered they came to all those shows. It's really hard to appreciate how valuable time is as an adult when you're 16. Plot twist. They enjoy watching you embarrass yourself. God, he's absolute shite, but look at the sucker go. Mom and dad made all the difference in our elderly neighbor's life. She was a sweetheart, a widow who couldn't get around much, but loved her home, cat and dog. Each week, my parents would do her grocery shopping for her, along with their own, and occasionally brought her a home-cooked Sunday dinner to brighten her week. Dad took care of her house repairs while mom cleaned it, with help from me and my brother. There was room in our parents' hearts to adopt this special lady and to make her last years memorable and enjoyable. This is so selfless. When I was little, our car hit a pheasant on a country road. I cried so much my dad buried it at the side of the road and made a little cross for it. When I was little, our car hit a pheasant on a country road. I read this as peasant. A letter drastically changed my appreciation of your dad. When my brother and I were probably like 10 and 8, we went through an astronomy phase. Despite us having school the next day and my dad working full time, he would always drive us to the next town over every Wednesday for an astronomy club that met and talked about the stars for an hour. He also woke us up at 2 AM on nights when there were meters or showers so we could drive to the outskirts of town and watch them. Some of my favorite memories, and definitely part of why I love science so much now. My dad supported me as a teenager by letting me make my own decisions. When 14-year-old me came home from high school and said that I had a chance to be an apprentice chef but I would need to take 2 days off school each week, he signed me right up for it and made sure I had everything I needed to complete both my apprenticeship and my GCSEs, achieving high grades in both. When I came home at 17 and told him that I had been accepted into an apprenticeship 500 plus miles away and I would need to leave in a week, he paid £200 for my train ticket. Considering we didn't have a lot of money growing up, this was huge for me. He continues to support me to this day. I could not have asked for a better father and I am forever grateful that he adopted me. I don't know why, but this one touched me the most. My mom would take me to the park and play hide and seek together. I was maybe 4 or 5 at the time. The park was off of a main road and it wasn't the best area of town. I found a really good hiding spot where I climbed up into a big tractor tire. However, I also had a large amount of hearing loss at the time due to constant ear infections, so I never heard her calling out my name when she didn't think it was funny anymore. She apparently couldn't find me and actually got worried. thinking that I had left the park fencing and gone off to hide elsewhere. That's when she saw a car pull up from the road and a kid get into the car, and then the car drove off. She thought it was me. My mom did track and field all the way into college and also ran marathons just for fun. She hurdled the fence and chased after the car until it pulled into a store parking lot. She realized it wasn't me, took down the license plate numbers and sprinted back to the park to find me crying with the other mothers because I couldn't find my mom after I came out of the tire. She ran this car down for 15 minutes one way. She had told me about this a couple of times because she remarks it as one of the scariest moments she's ever experienced. Your mom sounds like the inspiration for the T-1000. Legend. I did the whole I am running away thing when my mom did not buy me a Game Boy Color. She then helped me pack, and I got so confused and scared that I actually had to go through with it. She called my bluff, and I will do the same thing with my kids when they try the same bluff. My parents have a picture of me sitting on the side of my house with my pillowcase packed with who knows what. It's something I'll cherish forever. I don't quite remember why I wanted to run away, but I would have lasted maybe 2 hours. In elementary school, my very first chapter book was The Lost World, sequel to Jurassic Park. My mom's favorite movie to this day is Jurassic Park. The Friday it was released I was in class, 4th grade, and I got a call: Jotten, please come to the front office. Your mother is picking you up for your dentist appointment. Me out loud: I don't have a dentist appointment. Walk up to the main office, see my mom. Very loudly: Mom, I don't have a dentist appointment. Mom: Yes you do, Jotten. It was last minute. Me to the receptionist: I do not have a dentist appointment. Mom: Jotten, please go get into the car while I sign you out. Hands me the car keys. I go to the car and found 2 tickets to a 1 p.m. showing of Lost World. Later in life my mother said there was only one time she has ever wanted to cuss at me, and it was her wanting to tell me that day shut the frick up and get in the car, but she didn't. Turns out she really didn't want the school to know she was letting me ditch school to see a movie. So my father and I are driving home from the beach. We are on 695 Baltimore Beltway. It was getting dark. We were driving 65 miles per hour when BLAM there is a ladder in the middle of the road in front of our car. We couldn't go right. We couldn't go left. No way to stop in time. All we could do was drive over it and hope for the best. We do so, then immediately pull over, as do about a dozen other cars. Our car, a crappy minivan, sustained remarkably little damage. I can remember at least one car that was totaled. Several needed towed. The people that day, it was like a truly random sample of the population that was driving on the Beltway. It was heartwarming to see everyone help each other out. Everyone was going car to car and assessing for injuries, and then trying to figure out if they had skills or equipment to help out their fellow drivers. We had teamed up with this older black lady. She was alone in her car. The ladder had torn through and destroyed a rim on one of her rear wheels. If she could get the spare on, she could drive away. Problem: the spare was padlocked to the device holding it in. I remember it as a Jeep style, where the spare sits on the trunk. My father and I and her puzzled over it. She didn't have the key. It wasn't her car. Brother-in-law's if memory serves. I asked around for any tool that could cut through it. I couldn't find any. Her bill was friendly enough. He wasn't P, but he was far away and it was gonna take a while for him to get her the key. So, a bit of time goes by. There is nothing stopping us from leaving. Everyone else seems to have their crap together and they are leaving. We are just standing around chatting. I said to my dad, so there is nothing left for us to do. Let's get going. We have a ways to go. My father turns to me, gives me a stern look and says, we will not be going anywhere until we know that she is safely on her way home. This is my father at his best. He taught me by doing. I now teach my children in exactly the same fashion. If I want them to act in ways that will make me proud, that means that I have to live my life to that same standard. Yeah, my father called me on the carpet. I told that story at his funeral. Sounds like a real stand-up guy. Reminds me of how my dad wouldn't leave any of my friends' houses when he dropped them off until they were safely in the front door. I'm sorry for your loss. My mom was a singer when I was growing up. She ended up with a contract through a country producer around the same time as Faith Hill got famous. They wanted her to go on tour and to lie about having a child because she wasn't married anymore, which didn't mesh with the squeaky clean, down home country vibe they wanted. So she walked away to be with me, full time. You know, I've never once heard a story about a country music producer, or a music producer in general, for that matter, where they're not an utter crap. It's like an oil baron or a newspaper magnate. You know, if they feature, they are pretty much always going to be the bad guys. Good for your mother, though. One time my mum was driving me somewhere and we went past two massive blokes having a scrap. They were both well over 6 feet and built and they were properly thumping each other in the face to the point where blood was flying. My 5 feet 2 inches middle-aged school teacher mum stopped her Ford Fiesta, got out and started telling them off. Didn't even raise her voice. She just used that calm "you're in trouble" voice some teachers can do. She separated them and made them walk away in opposite directions, leaving trails of blood from their messed up faces. Then she got back in the car and drove off like nothing happened. I was speechless. I kinda love your mom for doing that. I am the oldest of 4 very close children. We were all born within 6 years, no twins. My parents had their hands full and money was tight, but we were loved and we had a great time growing up. When I was small, I had a breakdown and sobbed to my mother. I can't get any alone time. There's kids everywhere at school. There's kids everywhere at daycare. There's kids everywhere at church, and when I come home there are still kids everywhere. After hearing this from a 10-year-old me, my parents realized that each of us kids needed a private space to call our own. They then took all of the money they could and remodeled our house so that each of us then had our own room. All 4 of us had been staying in one bedroom. It took a long time to finish and we had to stay in an apartment for a short time, but in the end, I realized that I was very lucky to have parents who cared for my physical and mental well-being. Love this story. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck, but they did their best to never let it show. My father was always in poor health, so he couldn't work as much as he wanted to, but he would save his change in jar, put away a little money here and there, wherever he could, just to have a few $100s to spend on us at Christmas. I was 8 and always played on my Game Boy out late. I always hid it under my blanket and flipped over facing the wall, and pretended to be asleep. One time, she came in and sat on the side of my bed. She started rubbing my back, and started talking about how much she loved me. How I will never know how much she really loves me. She called me a miracle. She thought I was asleep. I never brought it up with her because it was really special that she didn't know that I was listening. Oh, Vladimir, you are such a miracle child. I love you so much. Really, a lot. Now get off that goddamned Game Boy and go the frick to sleep already. My mom and dad adopted 7 of us 9 kids. I have 4 Korean brother and sisters, 3 white, 1 black and me, Polynesian. They fostered 4 Navajo teens back in the day. They fostered a baby that was born with his stomach outside his body. They tried to adopt a special needs girl, but the facility wouldn't let them because they thought they were crazy. Turns out they knew the guy who ran the place and he let them take her home every weekend. They had all these girls on birth control and she had to take it every day but wouldn't let my parents give it to her. So on the weekends, they drove back Saturday and Sunday over 80 miles to get her pill. This girl was unwanted by her mom as a baby and grew up in some sort of hospital mental health disabled facility. She was there her whole life up to that point, so she picked up on all the mannerisms you'd expect to see. My parents saw something different in her. When they took her home they would tell her to blow her nose, wipe your face, wash your hands. She loved all of THR little kids and took care of them and played with them a little before my time outside the hospital. She did fine. She had leaps and bounds of improvement. The more my parents got her out, the more normal she became. The staff wondered how in the world they tuned her around. My mom simply said, by making her brush her hair. LOL. This was 40 years ago. She lives independently and has a boyfriend. She calls a couple times a year and asks how the little kids are doing. I could go on and on and on. After my dad died of ALS, People from all over the state and world even came out of the woodwork and shared incredible stories about him and my mom and the things they've done for them. Stuff us kids had no idea about, and things about my dad my mom never knew. It was great closure. People around town still recognize me as one of Roland's kids and tell me how great he was and how they'll never forget him. I love my parents to pieces. When I was in school, I had to work on an important project that was due for submission the next day. This was a time before 3G and 4G internet was popular and before smartphones were a thing. I came home from school to work on the project and realized that the connection was dead. I was flabbergasted and was crying buckets of tears. My mother, who had just had a major dental surgery that morning, mouth still full of stitches and blood, and still numb, reassured me through whatever speech she could manage, drove me to the store to buy me a data card, and also made my favorite Rajma chawal for dinner to comfort me. My mom is my best friend, my pillar of strength and just the coolest person on this planet. Whoa, your mum sounds like an amazing person. To do this, especially after having a major surgery, really makes me think about my own parents and the sacrifices that they've made for me. When I was in my teens I took some magic mushrooms for the first time. When I was in bed later that night I could see giant spiders coming out of my ceiling and coming down to attack me. My dad, who heard my screams, proceeded to kill them all with some newspaper which calmed me the frick down. Turns out the old man dabbled in his time and knew, or at least suspected, what was happening. Gave me a heck of a bollocking the next day, mind. I don't have any particularly awesome stories, but my parents were truly amazing. They were there when I needed them. Dad always made sure we had what we needed and more. Mom always encouraged me to be the best and do the best. They were never ever selfish and always tried their best to have an open mind. I don't think I'll ever live up to their standards of being a parent. Same. The best parents don't have to have amazing stories, they just have to make you a good person. When I was 18, my mum flew out to Hong Kong from the UK after I had a horrible gap year experience. She stayed with me for a week so I could have some positive memories of the place before we both flew home. That was the first holiday with just me and my mum, and I can't express how grateful I was to her for coming all that way just for me. I had signed up for metal wood shop as my elective class in middle school. The principal decided I would be better suited in home economics. When I told my dad, he came to my school the next day and ripped the principal a new butthole. I still remember him yelling, if my daughter wants to use tools or be a machinist when she grows up then that's her dang prerogative, while the principal sat in shock. Funny thing is most of my career has been working in manufacturing environments. Thanks Dad. My mom is the kind of person who avoid conflict so much it becomes a character flaw. She's kind of submissive with other adults, especially people in authority. The ultimate people pleaser who can't stand up for herself for fear to hurt someone else, being yelled at, or create a fight or any kind of conflict. I was hospitalized when I was 10. The chief of pediatrics ward was a great professor. When he came to me, he explained to his interns using all the scientific words and had lengthy explanations of what happened to me and what was done to treat me. 10 years old me didn't understand most words and was super scared because in my little head, all those big words meant there was something wrong that they didn't want me to catch on. And I was already stuck in a hospital bed. So what can be worse, frick, I'm going to die. My mom noticed that I was panicking. She stand proud, as cold as ice, and asked if Mr. the Great Professor would mind to lower himself for a minute to speak regular French. Please, you're scaring my kid, sir. The Great Professor looked affronted and made one of his intern do it. This one gives me a warm feeling inside for some reason. Good on your mum for noticing you were scared by all the big words and telling him to cut it out. My mum and dad broke up when I was about 10 years old. She raised me and my two sisters pretty much by herself, with dad doing the Sunday treat days. She always made sure we had a holiday every year and presents on our birthdays and Christmas. We never had to miss out on the school trips because of money, because she worked so hard and saved every penny. She took us on our first ever trip on a plane to Florida, where we did all of the parks in 1996. She's worked hard all her life and is always there to step in with either me or my sisters need any kind of financial help. She retired early at 60 and is pretty much living life. We always complain that she keeps wanting to get too involved when we plan parties or weddings and maybe taking over just a bit. I'm the last out of 3 of us to get married and she helped my cousin out massively as well. But she really has worked tirelessly to make sure our special days go off without a hitch. I surprisingly made the varsity basketball team as a sophomore in high school. Not only that, but I was penciled in as a starter for the first game of the season. Basketball was my life. This was the biggest deal. However, my dad lived 2 hours away. My mom moved us following a divorce 10 years earlier, and the game was on a weeknight. He'd been driving across the state for conferences, open houses, and rec games my whole life, but regretted to inform me that his work schedule just wasn't going to allow it for this one. Game was on the road in a shoebox of a gym in Kalamazoo, MI. The atmosphere was nuts. As we emerged from the locker room, the place was already overflowing and the school band was thumping. It all felt surreal. I was already overcome with emotion and nerves. Then I saw my dad directly across from the tunnel, standing and proudly applauding as I took the floor for the first time. I generally played like you'd expect a 160-pound 10th grade forward to play in his first varsity basketball game. Didn't even score. My only real memory from that night has forever been the look of pride on my dad's face as I took the floor for the first time, driving all the way from Detroit just to see his kid play a silly sport on a Tuesday night. He almost never missed a game, even if it was 3rd grade AYSO soccer. 4 hours of post 5 p.m. driving, at least twice a week for over 10 years. Crazy. TLDR. My pops drove 2 hours to make surprise appearance at first varsity basketball game. Emotional overload commenced. I'm a fairly large guy, and my stepdad is a moderately husky man himself. My mom is tiny. One time when I was probably about 17-18, he and I were arguing. I was sitting on the couch and he was standing and the argument got really heated, at which point I started scornfully saying, "What are you gonna do? Hit me?" He responded with, "Stand up and see." At this point my mom, who is a tiny woman who's only about 5'2" and maybe 110 stood between us and said, "There will be no hitting in this house." It was pretty badass of her, and I always remember how impressed I was with her at that moment. 2 guys throwing their egos around is one thing, but being half their size and standing between them is something truly awesome. As a disclaimer, he was not abusive or a terrible guy. We were both just being jerks that day. My parents got divorced when I was very young, maybe a year old. As a result, I lived with my mom and never really saw my dad except for special occasions like my birthday or Christmas. That's just the way it was, and I became accustomed to it without ever really understanding why it was that way. As I got older, I began to feel like my dad didn't care or couldn't be bothered to visit me. I never said anything about it to him, but I think that he sensed it somehow. One year, on Christmas Eve, we were leaving an annual family gathering late at night. I must have been about 9 or 10 years old. We got in the car to leave, and my dad just sat there quietly. I didn't say anything because I felt awkward and didn't know what was going on. My dad turned to me, looked me in the eyes and said, "I don't know what you think. I don't know what you've heard, but I want you to know that I do give a crap." That was all he said, but it was the most powerful statement he could possibly make. Now, as an adult, I understand that my dad couldn't visit because he paid about 80% of his salary to child support. He had to live far away because he had to go wherever there was a job for him. And he couldn't tell me these things because he didn't want me to resent my mother. My dad sacrificed so much just so I could be a happy and oblivious child. He did everything he could to make sure I had the best of everything. And he did it all never expecting anything in return. My dad is the greatest person I have ever known, and I hope that I can live up to his sacrifice. My first experience with weed was weed brownies. School found out and everybody who tried some was sent home for a week. When she heard the news they were letting me continue at the school, my mom baked celebratory brownies to give as a thank you gift. She was gracious enough to write weed free with icing. Surely denying these people education for an entire week isn't gonna do any good. If anything, it gives them an entire week to get absolutely mashed. My parents never did anything heroic or truly worthy of a story. They didn't suffer being poor or struggle through crippling disease or disaster. What they did do was provide a solid and steady life for myself and my sister. They worked their jobs, took us on holidays, and supported our education. They asked how my life was going from time to time. After I left home, my parents still participated in my life. They are still alive today and still talk to me frequently. I don't have any crazy stories to share, but I do have parents that fought through all those persistent problems of life to ensure me and my sister had a stable and pleasant childhood. I have nothing heroic to tell because they managed life with exceptional skill and a bit of luck. I am proud of them for that. Back in 4th grade I had a teacher named Mrs. Murray. She was the biggest bee I ever met and she had it out for me. I have ADHD, so when I droned off, she would mock me in front of the class when I came back to reality. She was awful. Anyway, it was a Friday and I was going to a sleepover at a friend's and packed my backpack. In there was my Game Boy. I unzipped the pocket and grabbed a pencil, and some snotty bee pointed it out knowing the teacher would take it. I pleaded my case about not using it, but taking it to her friends after school. No dice. After class, I asked for it and she laughed in my face. Told me no and the GTFO. Spent the night at her friend's and told my mom the story when I got home. Monday rolls around and while in her class my mom rolls up. She asked to speak with Mrs. Murray outside in private. The classes were more like trailers and we heard every word. The argument was calm until the teacher called me dumb and blamed my mother's parenting skill. We hear a loud smack. The teacher walks inside holding her face and the teacher grabbed my Game Boy and handed it to my mom who promptly left. Everyone in class was staring at me and I had the crap-eating grin for once. The teacher never gave me trouble after that. Also kids thought my mom was a badass. Kids thought my mom was a badass. I think she was, dude. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.